Hello everyone and welcome to the Constructive Criticism Network. This network is here to help you improve at Magic the Gathering at every level. From Pauper Leagues to Top 1000 Mythic, we've got you covered. If you want to hear the entire network, head on over to our sponsor at PureMTGO.com, where you can hear each and every show, each and every week, and check out their sponsor, MTGO Traders, and tell them that the CCMTG Network sent you. Now sit back, enjoy the show. From YouTube, podcasts, and more, here's this week's episode from ConstructiveCriticism.com. Hello everybody, and welcome to a video here on the Constructive Criticism YouTube channel. I'm Spencer, and I'm here today to do a special deck tech on a quest for 10 that I did this week. And by this week, I mean literally today. We got a huge banning across multiple formats, and the first thing that I wanted to do was write down the two decks that I was the most excited to try out and do quests for 10s with them. And this is the first of those two decks, and I did a quest for 10 with blue-green Ugin ramp. So, for those who don't know, Quest for 10 is a series that I will do where I try and get 10 match wins with the deck and then talk about that deck. Typically, it's going to be a deck that's really popular or really good in the metagame, but sometimes it'll be things that I just personally think could have a spot, and I'm going to, try and check them out. So, for this one, Blue-Green Ramp was something that I was really excited about. The idea of going Grazer into Cultivate, into Nissa, Cavalier of Thorns, stuff like that, really excited me, especially, after you go into Nissa, you can instantly go into Ugin pretty easily. So, I made a couple changes. I'm currently 15-2 with the deck, mostly beating up on aggro decks. There were some confusing moments during this 15-2. On Arena, I somehow was still playing, I played against a Fairy twice, and Cauldron Familiar once in this 15-2. So, I guess you could discount those 3 rounds. Though that is one of my losses, though, is actually to the Cauldron Familiar deck. But after those first 4 rounds, I think it was, I didn't play against another banned card. So, whatever effect was having on Arena eventually kicked in. I guess I actually don't know what happened. But with that being said, let's get right into the deck. If you want to participate in Quest for 10, you are also welcome to do that. Just get 10 match wins with the deck and share your thoughts over in the Discord on the Heezy Game Media Discord. There is Magic channels in there, and we have plenty of Magic players in there to kind of talk about Magic with. With that being said, let's go into the deck itself. First up, we have 4 Arboreal Grazers, 1 Vicious Hydra, 3 Hydroid Krasis, 4 Cultivate, 3 Uro, 2 Migration Path, 1 Tamiyo Collector of Tales, 4 Solemn Simulacrum, 3 Nissa Who Shakes the World, 3 Cavalier of Thorns, 3 Ugin the Spirit Dragon, and 1 Ugin the Ineffable. This deck has 28 lands, 3 Castle Garenbrig, 4 Breeding Pool, 4 Temple of Mystery, 2, I can't say this name at all. We have 2 of the Teamer Tri-Land, and 1 of the Bug Scryland. By the way, if you can say the name of these cards, leave a comment here on the YouTube channel with how to say them, and help me improve as a creator, because I have no idea how to say that. We have 1 Blast Zone, 3 Islands, 8 Forests, and 2 Fabled Passage. So, pretty good mana in the main deck, and we will get into the sideboard, but before we do that, I want to talk about the main deck a little bit. We only have a few spell lands in this deck. Castle Garenbrig acts as something that can create an extra mana. This typically helps when you're trying to maybe have a turn where you want to cast Cavalier of Thorns and Uro or Flashback Uro in the same turn. It also helps you make your Krasis and your Hydra bigger for your Hydra package. Blast Zone is next. It's kind of just a catch-all. I've activated this quite a few times in this deck. It's possible that you want a Field of Ruin in addition to this in this 75. I'm not exactly sure, kind of where you want your exact land base to end up. But, with Cavalier of Thorns, you're able to actually hit those spell lands with somewhat consistency. It's possible that if you did that, you'd actually want to go up to 4 Cavalier of Thorns to try and make that work for you. Blast Zone is pretty good against the aggro decks. One of the things that happened for me, at least, I had one time where I cracked this for 1 to 3 for 1 my mono red opponent And I also had a game where I got to crack it for 2 against a mono black deck to hit a couple of spells, and both times it was pretty good. Other than that, like, it's just a land in your deck, but it kind of gives you some utility. The way that this deck is typically going to win is actually, outvaluing your opponent in a lot of ways. Between Hydroid Krasis and your Planeswalkers, and Cavalier of Thorns and Uro, you're going to outvalue your opponent while keeping your life total high and just casting way more powerful spells than them. Even the spells that aren't that powerful for you, you don't have a lot of them. It's typically just Cultivate and Arboreal Grazer that are not going to get you extra value that aren't mana. Outside of that, Migration Path cycles itself. Solemn Simulacrum will block and draw a card. So basically, you have very few spells in your deck that aren't going to, give you a little bit of value. And because of that, you're going to get to outgrind your opponent, and eventually you'll either draw, a Krasis that your opponent will concede to, or an Ugin that your opponent will concede to, or they'll just, lose to the value of Uro. So a lot of things kind of add up to a lot in this ramp deck, and it might be different than if you're used to playing like blue-red ramp or green-red ramp, where you're casting a dragon that kills their thing and attacks them for 7 3 times. You typically, the games that you win, it is going to be with Cavalier attacks and an Uro attack, and eventually you've just overwhelmed your opponent to the point where they can't really do anything. I think the key thing that I want to talk about in this deck is its curve. As you could probably guess, Grazer is very important. The actual first list that I played, I think my first, let's see here, when I was 5-1, I had 4. It was quite a few matches that I played with 3 Grazer, and instantly I knew that the games where you have Grazer into Cultivate, are just so much more powerful than anything else you could be doing, especially at the, when you're going into Nissa and Cavalier of Thorns. The number of times where somebody just conceded after I went turn 1 Grazer, turn 2 Cultivate, turn 3 one of those 2 spells is pretty high in those 17 matches. It's just really hard to beat, especially on the play. I certainly never lost a game where I did that. And that's really important to talk about. I think that this deck has a pretty powerful starting point in that curve, and it's something to really consider. One thing that I would consider wondering about in this deck specifically, maybe you want to cut an Uro and you want to cut 2 other cards. Maybe even more than that. Maybe you want to cut one of the Hydras and one of the Krasis, and play a finale package with something like Risen Reef to actually really, really try and get that curve going. And that's definitely something to think about, especially if you play more Cavalier of Thorns. You definitely don't need the Ineffable if you're kind of going all in on that plan. And it also lets you up the number of creatures in your deck. You probably cut Migration Path in that point. It lets you, up your creature count so that those finale dosations work, and it's definitely the next step that I'll actually try out for this deck to see if that actually helps you overall. As far as the current build, though, I think that Grazer into your 3-drops is your most important draw. As you'll notice, I have a split on the Ugins. I did have 4 Ugins, but there's actually a lot of aggro in this format, and you don't have quite enough cheap ramp to, I think, afford a 4 of Ugin deck right now. As you only have those Grazers as your early ramp, you could consider playing Leafkin Druid and going really far down the elemental path, and that is totally fine. But as far as the way this deck is constructed, I really felt like you wanted to bring down slightly your curve to try and help with those aggro matchups, even though as winning them, it felt like something that was kind of difficult. I think, one of the things that I noticed was wishing that I had kind of a way to interact with my graveyard a little bit more. So I actually included 1 Tamiyo Collector of Tales. This was not in the initial list, and is something that I think will help you kind of get back things. It actually is effectively more of your Ugins, more of your Nissas. It lets you kind of play this bigger spell that digs you to the things that you need, and also can come down and become that other card that's in your graveyard, maybe from your Cavalier or things like that. And also fuels your Uros in a lot of ways. I actually cut a Cavalier of Thorns for this, and it was really helpful, I think, in kind of fixing some of the initial problems that I had with the deck. let's go over the sideboard. We have 3 Ether Gust, 2 Disdainful Stroke, 2 Negate, 3 Mystical Dispute, 2 Thrashing Brontodon, 2 Shifting Ceratops, and 1 Mass Manipulation. One of our 2 losses with this deck is against the blue-green Flash deck. I believe that, I mean, just on paper, that seems like a terrible matchup for your deck. Shifting Ceratops is going to try and help with that. Mystical Dispute, Disdainful Stroke, Ether Gust. You actually have a lot of cards for that matchup, and even with all of those cards, I don't even know how you're supposed to board to make that matchup really good. But there is a lot that you can do. Mono red and mono black were 2 decks that I was worried about a little bit. Mono red, you have Thrashing Brontodon, Ether Gust, to try and help you out. I've tried a couple of other things. I had Pulsa Marasa and Voracious Hydra in this sideboard. I had quite a few different types of cards to try and kind of help out against the aggro matchups, but I was actually doing so well against aggro with Grazer, Uro, Cavalier of Thorns, Solemn Simulacrum, Hydroid Krasis, Voracious, like the overall power level of the deck was pretty high. Now, that being said, this deck doesn't like. I had another person who said that they were losing to aggro decks only having 4 Grazer in the deck, and I really can relate to that. I think that it's something to look at in this deck to try and make your deck a little bit better against aggro in the main deck, because as you can see here, between Ether Gust, Thrashing Brontodon, all the cards that I mentioned that I tried out, if you want to include the rest of these cards on the sideboard, it's possible that we also have to consider what we have to do to, outside of Grazer to kind of help against those aggro decks. But that being said, I think the sideboard has a lot of play against a lot of matchups. Disdainful Stroke, Negate, Gust, and Dispute are kind of like this huge chunk of the sideboard that can come in different matchups to try and give you small edges against key spells. Thrashing Brontodon gets to come in against aggro, as well as just being really good against hard to deal with permanents. Shifting Ceratops can come in against mono red, to be honest, is totally reasonable. The Flash deck, of course, you can bring it in against anyone who's trying to play Absorb right now. And Mass Manipulation will just be able to come in and, in those grindy matchups where there's a lot of creatures in play, it's just going to completely obliterate your opponent in a lot of ways. So overall, I think that this deck is really strong. I think that, if I trust my friends, and so when one of my friends says, hey, I'm losing to aggro with this deck, it makes me think that, Grazer's not enough. We did cut a Hydra from the main deck for the list that we sent them. So it's possible, you still need that other Hydra. You still need, a couple of other things to try and help you out in those aggro matchups. And it's certainly something that, I'll be looking at trying to fix, even though I did particularly well against those decks. So let me know what you think. If this is the deck that you're wanting to try out, post any changes that you make in the comments. Make this a community. If you want to talk about the deck with me specifically, I'll definitely be in the comments. I'll be over in the Discord for He's a Game Media. We'll see everybody next week with another video here on the He's a Game Media YouTube channel. And don't forget to check out our sponsor over at puremtgo.com, where you can check out the entire Constructive Criticism Network. Thanks everybody so much, and we'll see you next time.